October 1959, Fifth Avenue, New York City. A building opens that shouldn't exist. Not a tower, not a box, a white spiral that looks like it landed from another planet. Inside, the floor tilts, walls curve, nothing is square. The Guggenheim Museum breaks every rule museums follow, and it took 16 years, 3 fortunes, and one architectural battle that nearly killed everyone involved to build it. This is how it happened. Solomon Guggenheim made his money in mining. Copper, silver, lead. By 1900, his family controlled mineral extraction across 3 continents. The wealth was staggering, the kind that turned men into collectors. Solomon started with old masters, safe choices. Rembrandt, Titian, paintings that announced you had taste and money to prove it. Then in 1927, at age 66, he met a woman who changed everything. Hilla Ribe was a German painter, sharp-tongued, uncompromising, and obsessed with abstract art. She believed non-objective painting, art stripped of recognizable forms, was spiritually superior to everything that came before. She convinced Solomon. Within months, he was buying Kandinskys by the dozen. Cleese, Delaunays, Bowers, work that most Americans dismissed as nonsense. By the early 1930s, his collection had outgrown his apartment. Ribe had a vision. Not just a gallery, but a temple. A structure that would elevate abstract art the way cathedrals elevated faith. She knew exactly who should design it. Frank Lloyd Wright, America's most famous architect, and also its most difficult. Wright was 70 years old in 1943 when Ribe contacted him. He'd built masterpieces, Falling Water, the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, homes that redefined domestic space. He'd also burned through clients, fought contractors, ignored budgets, and left half-finished projects scattered across 2 decades. Wright didn't collaborate. He dictated. The commission came with a problem. Solomon wanted the museum on Fifth Avenue, directly across from Central Park. Prime Manhattan real estate, surrounded by limestone apartment buildings and Beaux-Arts facades. Everything rectangular, everything traditional. Wright hated cities. He especially hated New York. Too crowded, too rigid, too obsessed with the grid. His response was deliberate provocation. He'd give them a building that rejected every assumption the city made about what architecture should be. His first sketches arrived in 1944. A spiral. Not decorative spiraling, structural spiraling. The entire museum would be one continuous ramp coiling upward around a central void. Visitors would take an elevator to the top, then walk down the gentle slope, experiencing art along a quarter-mile descending curve. No separate galleries, no right angles, no flat floors. The building itself would be the exhibition space, and the exhibition space would flow like water. Ribe loved it immediately. Solomon, more cautious, asked questions. How would paintings hang on curved walls? Wright's answer was blunt. They wouldn't hang. They'd tilt outward, following the wall's angle, which he insisted was superior to vertical display. How would the structure stand? Wright had worked it out. Reinforced concrete, poured in place. The ramp cantilevered from a central core. The engineering was radical but sound. What about cost? Wright estimated $750,000. Solomon approved the design in 1945. Then everything stopped. Solomon Guggenheim died in 1949 before construction began. Control of the foundation passed to his niece, Peggy Guggenheim, briefly, and then to a board of directors suspicious of Wright's vision and terrified of his budget. Ribe fought to keep the project alive, but her influence was fading. Wright, now in his 80s, refused to compromise. The design sat in limbo for years while the board debated, delayed, and searched for reasons to cancel. What saved the project was New York itself. By the early 1950s, the city was changing. The Museum of Modern Art had proven that contemporary art could draw crowds. Abstract Expressionism, Pollock, Rothko, de Kooning was gaining legitimacy. The Guggenheim collection, once seen as eccentric, now looked prescient. The board realized they had something valuable, but only if they could display it properly. In 1956, they gave Wright conditional approval to proceed. The conditions were harsh: budget locked at $2 million, construction timeline fixed at 18 months, no design changes without board consent. Wright agreed to everything and ignored most of it immediately. Construction began in August 1956. The site was tight, a narrow lot hemmed by existing buildings. Excavation went slowly. Bedrock lay close to the surface, requiring blasting. Neighbors complained about noise, dust, and the bizarre skeletal form rising between their apartment towers. The concrete work was punishing. Each section of the spiral had to be poured in sequence, the ramp cantilevering outward as it climbed. Forms were built, reinforced, poured, cured, stripped, then repositioned for the next level. It was slow, exacting, and expensive. Wright visited the site obsessively, arriving unannounced to inspect joints and question techniques. Contractors learned to dread his presence. He'd reject entire pours over hairline imperfections, demand re-engineering of details already approved, and issue new drawings that contradicted previous instructions. The budget shattered within 6 months. By mid-1957, costs had doubled. The board panicked and threatened to halt work. Wright responded by going public, giving interviews where he called the board timid and accused them of compromising his masterpiece. Behind the scenes, the fight was uglier. Engineers warned that some of Wright's details were unbuildable or unsafe. The skylight over the central rotunda, a massive glass dome, required custom fabrication that no American firm had attempted. The ramp surface had to be perfectly smooth. Any irregularity would be visible along the entire quarter-mile descent. Wright refused to simplify anything. His position was absolute. Build it as designed or cancel the project. He knew they wouldn't cancel. Too much money was already spent. Too much prestige at stake. Then in April 1959, 6 months before the scheduled opening, Frank Lloyd Wright died. He was 91. He never saw the building finished. The museum opened October 21st, 1959. Wright's team finished what he'd started, following drawings so detailed that little interpretation was needed. The skylight went in. The ramp surface was ground smooth. White paint covered every interior surface, exactly as specified. Critics arrived expecting disaster. What they found was something else entirely. The spiral worked. Visitors entered at ground level, took an elevator to the top, then walked down the continuous ramp, viewing art along the outer wall. The experience was unlike any museum they'd known. No discrete galleries, no backtracking, just a slow, controlled descent through a space that felt both intimate and monumental. But the art world revolted. Painters hated it. The ramp's incline made walls tilt outward. Paintings didn't hang vertically, they leaned. Frames needed special mounts. Scale was distorted. A canvas across the rotunda appeared smaller than it was. The curved walls rejected right angles. Rectangular works fought the architecture. Critics called it egotistical. Wright had built a sculptures and forced art to serve it. They weren't entirely wrong. The building dominated. Every object inside existed in relation to the spiral. Nothing could escape its pull. The foundation scrambled to adapt. Curators experimented with hanging heights, lighting angles, groupings. Some shows worked, others failed miserably. Large canvases overwhelmed the narrow bays. Small works disappeared. Sculpture had nowhere to go. The rotunda floor, that dramatic central void, became dead space, too precious to obstruct but too empty to ignore. Then something unexpected happened. People loved it, not the art professionals, the public. Attendance exploded. Visitors who'd never entered a museum came to see the building. They stayed for the art. The spiral made viewing effortless. No decisions about which gallery to visit next. No fatigue from standing in static rooms. Just a gentle descent with art unfolding in sequence. The architecture taught people how to look. The continuous ramp created rhythm. Each artwork appeared, held attention, then released it as you moved forward. The curve prevented crowds from bunching. Flow stayed constant, and the light, that massive skylight pouring illumination down the rotunda, transformed throughout the day. Morning brought cool clarity. Afternoon warmed the white surfaces. Evening softened everything. Within 5 years, the Guggenheim was New York's second most visited museum after the Met. The collection mattered less than the experience. Wright had gambled that architecture could be the attraction. He was right. But the operational costs were brutal. Climate control in a building that was essentially a concrete coil topped with glass required constant adjustment. The skylight leaked, not dramatically, but persistently. Repairs meant scaffolding that blocked the rotunda. Maintenance was a nightmare. Every surface was curved. Standard equipment didn't fit. Contractors charged premiums for the complexity. The ramp itself degraded faster than anticipated. Thousands of feet daily wore the surface. Patching was visible, so entire sections needed refinishing periodically. The work required closing galleries in rotation, cutting revenue while adding expense. Expansion became necessary by the 1960s. The collection had grown. The single spiral couldn't hold it. In 1968, the foundation added a tower behind Wright's rotunda. The addition was controversial. Some called it respectful. Others saw betrayal. Wright had opposed vertical expansion. He'd wanted the spiral to stand alone. The tower, designed by different architects, used compatible materials but different language. It provided needed space while creating visual tension. Further renovations followed. A second tower in 1992. Restoration of Wright's original surfaces in 2008. Each intervention sparked debate. How much change does a landmark tolerate before it stops being itself? The Guggenheim forced that question repeatedly. Today, the building operates as Wright never imagined. Blockbuster exhibitions pack the ramp, corporate events fill the rotunda. The gift shop occupies prime ground floor space. Educational programs, conservation labs, administrative offices, all consume areas Wright left undefined or opposed commercializing. The museum runs on roughly $30 million annually. Admissions cover perhaps a third. The rest comes from donations, endowment, events, merchandise. The building itself is both asset and liability. It draws crowds but demands extraordinary upkeep. Insurance alone is staggering. You can't replace a Wright original. What remains undeniable is the power. Step into that rotunda and architecture still commands. The spiral pulls your eye upward. Light falls from above. The space hums with a clarity of intention that hasn't dimmed in 65 years. Wright died believing the board had compromised his vision. In truth, they built it almost exactly as drawn. The real compromises came later, necessary adaptations to keep the building alive and useful. He'd have hated some of it. The commercial intrusion, the added towers, the crowds shuffling through taking selfies instead of studying art. Yet the core gesture survives. That defiant spiral rising against Manhattan's grid. A building that refuses to be invisible. Wright wanted to prove that architecture could be art's equal, not its servant. He succeeded. The Guggenheim doesn't display art, it competes with it. Whether that's triumph or flaw depends on who you ask. Curators still struggle with the space. Artists sometimes refuse to show there. But millions visit annually, and most leave changed. Not by what they saw on the walls, but by the walls themselves. Wright's last building became his loudest statement, a spiraling manifesto in concrete and light. It cost more than projected, took longer than planned, fought every compromise, and became exactly what he intended. Not a museum that holds art, but architecture that is art. Difficult, uncompromising, impossible to ignore. The Guggenheim stands because Wright refused every exit. He built the spiral and trusted it would endure. Decades later, it does. Leaking skylight, worn ramp, contested additions, and all. The dream held. Barely. Expensively. But it held. The fortress opened. Visitors climbed. Critics complained. the public flooded in anyway. Wright's spiral taught a lesson the architectural world kept forgetting. Buildings that demand attention outlast buildings that ask permission. The Guggenheim cost fortunes, wrecked schedules, and ignored every rule. It survived because someone refused to let practicality kill vision. Today it stands, leaking and expensive and utterly irreplaceable. A white coil against the Manhattan grid, proof that the hardest fights sometimes build the most enduring monuments. The question isn't whether Wright was right. The question is whether anyone since has had the nerve to be that wrong and that certain at the same time.